Hey guys, welcome back to Horticulture. My name is Laura, and today we'll be talking about rosemary. If you've been watching our show for a little bit of time, you know that one of my personal goals this year is to build out our own homegrown apothecary for our family's usage. And I love rosemary. I use it all the time from a culinary standpoint. But it wasn't until I started researching more about the history of rosemary and its medicinal uses that my appreciation for the herb grew, just like everything else that I'm learning. So stay tuned. In this episode we're going to talk a little bit about that history, as well as I'll share with you a couple of these quote-unquote recipes on how you can take rosemary and actually use it to heal yourselves. So come with me. So rosemary is native to Southern Europe, more specifically around the Mediterranean Sea. It's been dated back to 500 BC and I believe even further, to when we hear about the Romans and the Greeks that used it for cognitive support. Now if you've done any kind of research into the history of rosemary, like at all, you'll quickly come to learn about Queen Isabella of Hungary, or Hungary? Anyways. Court alchemists utilized rosemary, mint, sage, lavender, and other herbs to create a concoction with the usage of vinegar as well to cure the queen of her paralysis and joint paralysis and gout. Another source, or a few other sources, suggested that it was at the queen's bidding to the court alchemists to make a concoction to keep her youthful. Whichever direction the end of the story took, the one thing that's common, the common denominator, is the fact that she utilized herbs, rosemary included, to support herself, to heal herself in some way. Something that I wanted to read to you all. It's not related to rosemary, but I thought it was a very good message to share. So this is from her father, who wrote Queen Isabella a letter after the passing of her husband. He wrote, "On hearing the news of Zephala's death," this is Queen Isabella's husband, "Isabella's father, the Polish king Sigismund I, sent a letter of advice to his daughter. Do not allow yourself to be crushed by grief," he wrote. "The course of prudence is that reason should rule the emotions. It becomes a prince to bear, with composure, that which cannot be altered. To succumb to immoderate weeping is to contest the will of God, whose judgments are a great abyss." You ask me, pretty sound advice from a loving father. Queen Isabella's story dates back to the late 14th century. So it got me thinking, what else happened around this time frame? Well, around the late 14th century, beginning of 15th century, here comes the bubonic plague. Now the bubonic plague is a bacterium called Yersinia pestis, which is a gram-negative bacterium. This anaerobic organism that is transferred by fleas from rats has the ability to take 3 different forms depending on where the bacterium is located in your body. If it's in your lymph nodes, it's called bubonic. If it's in your lungs, it's called pneumonic. And if it's in your blood, it's called septicemic. I want to share another folk tale with you all, one that happened around 17th century France. The bubonic plague was still disrupting the world, but there were these 4 gentlemen who were sea merchants who found a way to escape death. Due to the trials and tribulations they faced to feed their own families, they began robbing dead corpses, those who had died or perished from the bubonic plague. Finally, when they were caught, the judge gave them essentially a plea deal. He said, "If you tell me the secret to how you can rob these dead corpses and not sustain the Black Plague yourself, I will not burn you alive." So the thieves thought, okay. They told him that because of their trade as being sea merchants and spice merchants specifically, they knew the beneficial aspects that different herbs allowed for them or gave to them. So they would take rosemary, mint, sage. Doesn't that all sound really familiar to Queen Isabella's story? Anyways, going back to it. They would take these different herbs and create oils from them, essential oils. And they would rub them on their temples, hands, feet, neck, and then they would take dried herbs and actually stuff them into a mask. Now this mask is what you would actually see at that, that era as physicians and doctors wearing. It was this bird-like mask, and they would stuff it in the beak and cover their face with it. And they claimed that by doing that, they were able basically to escape death. Now, the judge was astonished at hearing this. I mean, it was something that nobody had ever tried, never looked into. So he quickly, of course, began sharing it with nearby physicians and doctors. While he did not burn them alive, he did hang the thieves for their crimes, and their story lives on to be known as the Four Thieves, where they would burn rosemary in hospital wards as a proactive preventative measure to prevent the spread of infectious diseases. It's pretty impressive. I don't know, I get so excited when I learn things like this because history tells you a lot. There's nothing new under the sun. And knowing that I have this gift of rosemary outside of my door and learning ways that I can actually use it to heal my family gets me so excited. So let's continue. I can completely appreciate if you do not want to ingest something after hearing folk tales. Trust me, I do. I do, of course, do my due diligence and look at peer-reviewed research journals before I consume any of the herbs, just to get a better understanding of the research that's been done and some of the facts, that they derived from doing the testing. You all can go through and scan on this. If you go to Google Scholar, as an example, you can type in different herbs that you're interested about and see some of the scientific studies and peer-reviewed studies that have been done on them. It's a good place for you to really get information on what exactly the herb can do for you and how they're currently testing its effectiveness for treatment. Here are just a few that I've come across that I wanted to highlight here, talking about the active constituents in rosemary, the impacts that it does from an antioxidant to memory retention, anti-inflammatory, the works. This particular study here does talk about how it's used as a circulatory tonic and to stimulate hair growth. One of the recipes that I came across was actually creating an oil-based rosemary solution that you would apply in the shower just to help stimulate new hair growth, which is definitely something that I'm going to try because I have a lot of split ends. So I'm sitting in front of our herb bed, is what we're calling it, this first bed here in the aquaponic system, and it smells so good. I'm smelling oregano, rosemary, sage. I'm smelling it all, and it smells amazing. I feel like I should be in an Italian pizza shop. Okay, so this video, or towards the end of this video, I'm going to share a couple recipes with you. Full disclaimer, these are not my recipes. These are ones that I've uncovered as I was doing my deep dive into rosemary, and much of them I am trying myself. I always encourage, before you share things, to try them yourself so you can have a personal, authentic testimony to speak to. I have a rosemary tincture that I use as a daily regimen in the mornings along with my oregano tincture, and I'm sure that will evolve. It's just a few drops. I believe it's 2 to 3 drops. 2 to 4 times a day is what you can do, and you typically apply it under your tongue because that's the quickest pathway into your bloodstream for its effectiveness. So that's a tincture. We're also going to show a recipe for Hungary water. Different sources will tell you the recipe's different, but we're going to try this recipe that we haven't done yet because I'm still waiting on a couple of the herbs that are in there to actually grow here on our homestead. We're also going to show you a rosemary oil that you can use for hair growth. So rosemary has the properties, as we've discussed, to help support hair growth. And then we are going to look at a rosemary infused tea, something that you can quickly cut off some sprigs and use it in your morning teacup. So I am so thankful that you guys joined me today. I hope that you were able to glean some value from, some of the research that I've done on rosemary. And I would say my one piece of recommendation is go grow rosemary. It's amazing, highly prolific, it's easy to grow, and it's something that you can share with people in so many different ways and use in so many different ways. So with that, thank you for joining us today at Horticulture, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Come on back as springtime is gearing up, and I have a bunch of baby plants that need some love. So we're gonna probably hop into the greenhouse here soon and show you a little bit about my particular process on how I start seeds, and then of course take the starts and plant them in the garden. So until then,